Great. So I'm here today with a really wonderful collection of people who work with the TCO International Network. We have Marcelo, he's in Argentina. We have Simone, she's from Brazil, and Carla from Mexico. We wanted to give a special focus on working in, well, I think I should call it Latin America, but I'm not quite sure. They might help me along the way. I'm from the United States, which is also America. So here you have 4 Americans to look at what does it mean to work with Americans and how different or the same might we be. So one of my first questions is, let's just start with misconceptions and some of the wrong ideas that people might have. I think, Marcelo, do you want to start us off with a couple ideas around misconceptions of working with Latin Americans? Can we call them that?
Well, right now everybody's calling like people from here in Latin America, and there are many things that we could argue about that, but actually many people wouldn't feel included within the term Latin America. What about the people that come from Africa? What about the people that actually are origin from here, the Indians from here? So even though that most of the people recognize these regions as Latin American, we need to understand that actually the diversity that you can encounter in the region is so big that it's important to recognize that eventually you will find people that are totally different from each other, and that's working and doing business in Brazil or in Mexico, or in Argentina, or in any other country will has its own challenges and opportunities. So one of the common misconceptions that people usually have when coming to Latin America is that they consider a unique region, all exactly the same, and actually it's not like that. And we can have so many differences that probably we can discuss a little bit more about here. But talking about the language, even though you might find some countries that speak the same language, still Spanish might vary a lot. And talking with somebody from Chile, somebody from Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, even us working together in Latin America, we find a lot of challenges, cultural clashes, cultural shocks, and so on. So the first step when coming to Latin America is to understand there is a lot of diversity here, and don't be misled by the title of Latin America, because we are forgetting some subcultures that are very important of the essence of the region.
Yeah. Well, and so, I mean, I'm from California, and in California, there's a lot of Latin Americans and predominantly Mexicans. So when I went to Peru for the first time, I definitely was immediately aware that it wasn't quite like Mexico, and actually the Spanish was very different. So Carla, I saw you nodding your head when he was talking about some of the differences between language and between, even if you're both Spanish speaking. Have you worked with others in kind of South America and come across some differences in communication styles that was different when working within Mexico?
Yes, I fully agree with Marcelo. There are a lot of differences. Actually, just talking about Mexico, you could actually talk about different types of Mexicans. Because, you know, in Mexico, there was a strong indigenous population when the Spaniards came. There was a whole civilization of Aztecs and other cultures, so still present. So there's even a lot of differences there, even in our home countries. And yes, well, I have mostly worked with Argentina, Colombia, Panama, and Brazil. And yes, of course, there are a lot of differences in terms, the way we use the Spanish terms. Sometimes some of the words we regularly use in Mexico, turns out they're bad words in other countries in Mexico. So I'm quite in the same, you know, from the other side. And also, you know, Mexico being so close to the United States, we have been strongly influenced by the United States culture, and there have been a lot of changes in the Mexican culture, especially at a business level. So it also has created some barriers when working with our Latin American counterparts. When we are, in terms of culture, we're just a little bit more similar to the regular culture, like family and general values with Latin America. But in terms of business, with this strong influence from the United States, it has been creating some conflicts as well in the region. And companies usually divide the regions as, it's the United States and Canada, and they call it North America, even though Mexico is part of North America. And they divide, they say Latin America. And just as Marcelo was saying, they try to work with the whole region of Latin America in the same way. They have these HR policies and trends that they want to establish with the cultural organization. And they try to come to Latin America and just follow the same pattern that they have been using in the US or in Europe. And of course, they start facing some cultural shocks and some resistance with people and with some differences with each culture now. So yeah, I guess that's the experience that I have had.
Really interesting insights, especially how, there's regional differences within each country, obviously, with the culture of an urban person that grew up in a very urban environment versus more rural influences how they interact. But then also what you're saying here with kind of the social side of the culture in Mexico maybe can feel more connected to other countries in Latin America, but in the business setting, I saw a lot of heads nodding. Simone, you were nodding when she was saying, in a business context, what are some of maybe the influences that you see in Brazil? And do you see the same kind of division between, in a social side, it's influenced from one type of values, but more in a business side, there's another influence? Have you seen this kind of similar situation as Carla was saying in Mexico?
Yes, I see that both Marcelo and Carla are focusing on the diversity of the region. I think this should be really emphasized here, especially if we're talking about Brazil and the other countries. Of course, we start with the language difference, but there's much more than that. There's really, the more you dig, the more you find differences, which is very interesting. Companies, when they come to this region, they sometimes establish themselves in Brazil because it's a larger market, and they think that, okay, I'm in a regional area, so I can work in other countries, but it doesn't really work like this so well. I have been exposed to some global strategies in working in the region, and this is the basic mistake. Just assume we are close enough that they can have the same strategy. And I think it's very interesting, this conversation here. I recently had contact with Mexicans in Brazil, and one of the specific differences in this case was the hierarchic differences, how much people accept power distances in Mexico against Brazil. So that there's a big difference there. And the other difference was actually how direct and indirect people are supposed to be at work. So it's very interesting.
Well, let's look at this a little bit too, this concept of direct and indirect communication, and maybe even in an example in the virtual context. Marcelo, I know that you're working with virtual teams and learning how to collaborate virtually. Do you see some of these communication style differences maybe in how people write an email or how they conduct a video call, how much time is given to the work task or relationship? What kind of observations have you seen?
Well, I've seen it all the time, and actually it's funny because in many cases there are some companies that come from Europe or from the US to work in Latin America, and they actually get prepared to deal with differences that they might find between Europe and Latin America. But sometimes they forget that even between Latin America there are so many differences that sometimes the clashes occur between Latin American countries. And there is an example about, well, I've seen it many times from Argentinians working with Mexicans, that every time Mexicans use the word ahorita, which would be a nice way to say in an ambiguous, in a very indirect way of communication, that it depends on the context, I will reply to your emails. And that context, it will vary a lot. It actually doesn't mean nothing concrete, but we Argentina, we tend to be a little bit more direct. We actually take the word, but what it means, ahorita means now. So actually, I've seen many Argentinians actually looking at the computer, waiting for the email because they say ahorita, so they might be coming. And this is another critical step, because if Argentinians haven't developed the right relationship with Mexicans, this ahorita can last much longer than expected. But if they manage to develop the right relationship, usually that ahorita will last less, because they will be more willing to contribute and collaborate because we have a good relationship. And that's a lot, because the indirect communication is a result of many other aspects and values of the society. Relationship and trust is an essential part of the communication process in Latin America. Sometimes you might expect the speed of the response by email, but by phones, might depend on the relationship that you have developed with your counterparts in the different countries. So this is very important to pay attention, because it affects a lot, especially when we're talking virtually, that actually sometimes you cannot see the other person, you don't have the possibilities of listening. If you receive an email, you don't listen the intonation that the people is giving. So at least for Argentinians, and of course it will vary from country to country, but the relationship, the fact that I know that you have a good will of communication and develop a lasting relationship is important. And we need to feel that through the virtual communication, even through emails. So there's some specific action you need to start reading and reading in between the lines to see actually what do they mean. If when they say no, actually it meant no, or it meant something else. How can I check the real meaning of what they say?
That's a really great example. I love that, Carla. I saw you laughing with the ahorita, and I recognize this term being used by Mexicans. I live in Spain right now, and when I saw someone send an email that said ahorita, I said, they're not Spanish. I know. It's a good sign. So what do you do when you receive messages, and when you say, read between the lines? Is there some good practices that people could establish? I mean, the other topic that is important, I think, with culture difference and working across cultures is, etiquette is important, but sticking with being good etiquette and looking at the appropriate etiquette for a culture is limiting, and working towards competence. And so what could that look like in this kind of a situation, with an email, receiving an email, or having a conference call? Any advice on how to help people know what's the right way to practice building good relationships? Who wants to speak? Carla? Great.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was well, yeah, I guess a good practice, just taking a little bit from what Marcelo was mentioning, specifically about Mexico and the ahorita, and there is another one called mañana, tomorrow, and which also doesn't mean mañana or tomorrow. It just means that I will get to it when I can. So yeah, I guess an advice when working with Mexicans, for instance, would be to ask for a specific date and time. So if you receive an answer like that, yeah, I will send it to you ahorita, right now, then just ask, could you just give me an idea of the time so I will be in the lookout for that email or for that report? So asking for a specific time and date would help a lot. And in Mexico, I will not get into it a lot, but coming with this strong influence from the Aztecs, time was circular. So if you did not have a chance to do something right now, it doesn't matter, because time is like it's a cycle, and you will get to it whenever, in another opportunity. While for most European or the US cultures, it's like a straight line. So that's why time is so important. If you don't do it right now, you will lose the opportunity, and you cannot get back in time to do it later. So So this is just why time is so relative to Mexicans. And also because, relationships are more important than time in business. So that's another situation. And talking about relationships and going back to your question, I guess in Mexico, you should probably want to start your emails by, hi, how are you? How was your weekend? How's family? And then you go to the business at hand, then ask for something. Because if you go straight to the business, that is one of the most conflictive situations Mexico has experienced with the US, where Mexicans, they get this idea that Americans are rude, that they don't, say hi, at least before asking for something, and they just go straight to business. Or this other funny, story where Americans tend to, and also some Europeans tend to throw papers, right, at you instead of giving them to your hands, right? So that is also perceived as a very rude thing to do, and that could damage the relationship right from the start, right? So in a virtual sense, in an email or something like that, asking first how people are, or saying hi first, it would be equal to throwing papers when physically present. And
it's a great example.
Yeah, so for instance, I had a supervisor who was from England, and he is such a nice English gentleman, but when it talking about these paper things, he also did this kind of thing, like throwing papers at you. I was like, what did I do wrong, or why are you upset? So these kind of things are something you would like to think about when working with some Latin cultures. I don't know, we're all the same. Marcelo and Simon will probably
yeah.
But I can say in Mexico, relationships, keeping a good relationship is an important thing to do, especially when dealing with people from, I wouldn't like to use the term lower classes, but in terms of, economy, that is true. So if you have a factory, for instance, if, middle management has been closer to other cultures, so they're a little bit more open with that. But if you're working with lower classes, their relationship gets even stronger and more important. And there are some even stories about companies coming to Mexico to establish a factory and having this terrible relationship with the workers, where they had to actually close the factory. There was just a huge problem. And recently I just heard the story about Argentina and Mexico. There are some Argentinian supervisors coming to the automotive industry, and they're facing this problem because, as Marcelo was saying, Argentinians are more direct in their speech, and sometimes this is perceived as being rude. So, and this is happening right now. A lot of Argentinians are coming to Mexico to work in the automotive industry. And,
we love Mexico. Argentina loves Mexico. Something to what, if we come back to the virtual setting, sometimes we have a preference for communicating through emails or through phone or through something like that. But let's not forget that virtuality and technology right now give us the possibility of turning on the webcam and having a conversation like we were just face to face. It's not going to be the same, but still, if you can add some visual aids to your communication, it will help a lot to avoid misunderstandings through emails, to actually complement the email, to make sure that other people understood the message, to actually discuss and see their reaction, and reading between the lines by seeing the face and the reaction they have, to ask questions, to have an immediate response from the other side. So this is also very important as part of the construction and building of relationship.
Yeah, really great example. And when you've been speaking, I've been hearing a bit of a theme here that context is important. And so there's reading between the lines, and, in this example of clarifying, well, what was the context of the ahorita? And then also kind of establishing context. Hello, good morning, how are you? Getting a bit of testing out how is the relationship at that point. to gather contextual information. And so, Simone, I wanted to ask you, I mean, I saw you nodding with Carla was talking about the contextual importance and the different dynamics of, kind of socioeconomic influences. I'd love to hear a bit about how it is in Brazil.
Yes, I was really agreeing with Carla and Marcelo in many areas. I would like just to stress that in terms of direct and indirect communication, Brazil is probably the most indirect communicators ever in Latin America. And it also means that we have a specific difficulty to say no and to disagree, especially in social and professional conversation. So the problem here would be that we are very we avoiding this confrontation. So it means that we will probably agree with everything said in the meetings, but it does not mean that we will do it, that we actually agree with everything. So for foreigners in Brazil, they have to specifically be very good at confirming and being active in checking about the problems that people might have very actively, otherwise they will lose it. And also because Brazilians tend to protest in a very silent way. They just don't say anything. And I mean, for a very direct and verbal cultures, that means everything is okay, and it means exactly the opposite in Brazil. So it takes a lot of skills and these non-verbal senses to pick up the problems and to even to assume that there will be problems which people don't want to discuss. So I think we almost in the extreme in terms of being indirect in Brazil.
Yeah, so have you found that working with Brazilians, Carla, I saw that she was saying some things that resonate. Have you found them to be more indirect than working with other countries in South America?
Oh, no, I meant that in Mexico, we're pretty much the same. We're also really indirect. Saying no for us is almost like insulting, especially to the higher levels, because as Simone was saying, we're very hierarchical. Some industries in Mexico City, Monterrey, the main cities are a little bit different, but mostly hierarchy is power distance as a common feature, for Mexico, and I now to Brazil as well. And so that's why saying no or disagreeing with the authority sometimes is almost unthinkable. But this does not mean that they will agree and they will do, as because they said yes, as Simone was saying. In Mexico, you will face probably passive resistance. If they were not really agreeing with what was said, they will passively resist. We're not good with confrontation or conflict. So,
okay, we have that in common, Carla. we should measure at some point.
So as Simone said, people should be really careful with reading the signs with non-verbal communication. And people coming from Europe and other countries where communication is so direct, they usually don't pay that much attention to the non-verbal signs of communication.
Yeah, so, and I could add, Carla, that it's very important, I think, in our region for foreigners to pay attention to the informal organization. There's a lot going on, a lot of political influences that you're not aware if you don't have, as Marcelo said, if you're not close to people, if you don't pay attention to the relationships, so you won't know what's happening. So the informality in the organizations are really in the extreme sense. I mean, you have to pay attention to all these human and political aspects in the organizations.
Yeah, I'm loving seeing these themes and similarities, and also just understanding kind of some of the unique differences. And what I'm hearing a lot is just there's immense amount of diversity, and raising sensitivity and awareness, and taking time to be reflective, and maybe a little bit more prepared about responding to an email or a message, and thinking twice about what are the possible other meanings this had, and where may my assumptions be leading me wrong. So we have to wrap up here, but I wanted to end with an opportunity for each of you to say in brief 30 seconds, what's the opportunity of working within your region, and what's some of the great things when we have these wonderful, successful collaborations? What's some of the great things about working with people in Brazil, in Mexico, and Argentina? So Marcelo, do you want to go ahead and say a few words on that topic?
Well, when we are talking about opportunities in Argentina specifically, we can mention the opportunities in business sense. I mean, we're talking about a market, especially Argentina is still growing, even though we have a macroeconomic crisis all over the world. It's a country that is growing, and it's projecting to keep on growing in the next few years. But also, if we consider the region as a whole, it happens all the time that when some countries in the region are growing, some other countries not that much, and then it comes the other way around. In the whole history, it has been some countries are stronger than the others. So being present in the region is a huge opportunity, because you have always stabilities in economic sense. But then when it comes the possibility of people coming to the country, getting to know the culture, interacting, or having the possibility to live a few months or even a year or perhaps more time, it gives you the opportunity to discover a new way of viewing things, or seeing life in a way. I've seen many Europeans, US Americans coming to the region and really loving it, actually taking the sense of the relationship, or starting to consider other aspects of doing business, on actually enjoying. It's not only about the success in economic terms, but also about doing what we want, and having fun, and developing friendship, even in the business world. So I believe that there are opportunities in every aspect you're looking at, even in the economic side, in the business side, and also in the personal side, because there are many options for you to grow, to learn new things, to learn a language, to discover a culture that has the influence from so diverse, but also the influence from other civilizations that have contributed a lot. So this is what I think.
It sounds like you're happy to be Argentinian.
I'm happy to be a human being. In disguise, I have the chance of being Argentinian, but I feel I would be also happy if I had the chance of having born in Brazil, or in Mexico, or in the US. Each country has its own magic. And of course, Argentina has many challenges as well. We need to be realistic. It's not going to be easy. You need to be able to deal with the challenges in political terms, in some crises, in disparities, and so on. But you also need to understand the whys and the reason why this is happening, and the sense that in a way we're also progressing and learning from our own mistakes. It's an experience, and you need to see and understand the whys. It's easy to come to Latin America and judge because of the challenges and crises that we are experiencing. But when you start connecting and understanding how we work it, and why we are in the stage we are, and all the things we still have to learn, and actually you want to contribute to the development, not just complaining about the region, there are so many opportunities that I would strongly recommend anybody to consider the region, to see different aspects of life.
Great, thank you so much, Marcelo. And Simone, what's the opportunities in Brazil, and what are some of the wonderful things that Brazilian people add to kind of the business environment, relationship, and kind of new experiences?
Yeah, as Marcelo was saying, this is still a growing region, so there are many opportunities, specifically in the structural sectors in Brazil. We still need a lot of investments in basic things. So that opens up many possibilities. In terms of personal experience, as Marcelo said, that there's something special about this region in terms of in the human side of things. I mean, not everyone that comes to Brazil loves it. Of course, some people have cultural shocks because it is too personal. I mean, if you're not ready to expose yourself and to be asked personal questions all the time, even at work, you might find it a little bit difficult. But I think in terms of human and social abilities, we are very intense. So or you love it or you hate it.
And Carla, what would you like to leave us with thinking about Mexico?
Sure. Well, just as Marcela was saying, and Simone, I guess the whole region is, in general terms, growing and attracting the eyes of other countries to invest in our countries. And, you know, in Mexico especially, the automotive industry is growing exponentially. It's like every time you close and open your eyes, there is another company building their facilities. And what is really interesting is that they have been bringing a lot of talent from other countries in Latin America. For instance, in Brazil, Brazil has a huge Japanese population. So this is an asset from Brazil, and Mexico has been bringing some talents from Brazil because they know about the Japanese culture and they even speak the language. They're bringing people from Argentina, from Venezuela. Some companies are actually eagerly looking for bringing up people from Venezuela because they're facing such a terrible time right now in terms of economy. So I would like to see more of these Latin American, helping each other and getting together, because for so long, even though we're close together in terms of language and geographically, it seems that we have been experiencing our own history apart when we could be helping each other. And so I would like to see, and I think we're starting to see this a little bit, because of the regions. Now that the other companies this is the good side of it. When they say, it's a Latin American region, we start having more meetings and visiting each other countries and meeting people. And in my personal experience, when I used to work in General Motors, and we had a lot of contact with Brazil. And it's funny because we were in Germany or, in a conference or in another country, and every time Mexicans and Brazilians, we ended up together and having a huge party, having a good time. And or I also work at Club Med, and all the Latin American countries, we ended up together. So it was Colombia and Argentina and Chile and Mexicans, and we were together and having, again, such a good time. And supporting each other. So I think if this trend of this regional development keeps happening, I think that it will help all of our countries in come closer together and growing together in our own terms and respecting our own differences, but also becoming stronger in the common areas. So I guess I see, maybe I'm too positive about this, but I see a good future for all of our countries here.
Well, that's a really lovely idea, and I definitely think it's an interesting new way to think about the region. That I would say my takeaways from today was, there's so much immense diversity. Yes, there is a regional feeling, but don't look at it as just one place, because there is such richness. But in a future view, wouldn't it be great to see really strong collaboration within the region, not just with the region with external markets, but how are the countries locally collaborating together? So really wonderful to have all of you here today, such richness in all of your experience, and For everybody watching today, you know, we have a group of really well-rounded and great experience in Latin America. So hopefully if you had questions, you can leave them in the comments and we'll be happy to respond to them and continue talking and looking further in depth in the Latin America region. Thanks so much.